Hello and welcome to my third installment on my series of automating the test of a complete software stack, where that's got several names as well, like continuous integration in Yocto, so forth. With the third installment, we're going to we've already sort of set up a repository on my GitLab, but we're going to set up a Docker image, a GitLab runner. We're going to create basically a pipeline, and we're going to deploy in our pipeline the images that we create in Yocto. But So to get started, one of the things I noticed in my last video was that the at the end when I loaded up the Yocto image, I said, "Oh, there's no way to validate that," but there actually is. I could have SSH'd into it and then shown that I'm in the root of my device. I'm on the address we expect, but it's my Yocto image. And one of the ways I can kind of prove that out is that I can show that I've got the installed packages in the places I expect them. So this is a Mate 2 Yocto image. I'm using it specifically to run Mate 2 applications on an end device. And so I've got my packages, Mate 2 dev, which is kind of the core, and components, which is kind of the auxiliary stuff, and SDN, which is one of my support packages that I need as well. So I've got that all installed. I can see that that's on my Yocto image now. So that's a recap on the last video. On the new, what we're going to do is I'm going to start by making out this scenario where those two packages, they're provided by a community, they're provided by an external entity. But I've got this additional package, which I created my own code for, and I want to bundle that into my project. But what I also want to do is that whenever my repository of code gets updated, I want my Yocto image to get updated as well to reflect that, or I might want to test against that. And we'll be testing against that later on. So let's get on and start by creating this automated deployment method. So go back to scenario 3. Let's start with creating our Docker image. So I already actually have that created. I just haven't uploaded it yet. So let's go ahead and go to get status. And then I'm going to do the card. Well, I'm going to do Docker file and .gitlab ci.yaml. Upload video free tutorial files. Don't need to change anything else. So git push. Okay. Happy with that. Oh, that's just to the README as well, so it's definitely not kind of affected anything on my side. Yeah, it's nice to update the README via the GitLab interface. So yeah, I've got this Docker file now. We can go and have a look simply on the GitLab interface for it. So let's find my Mate Yocto, and here's my Docker file. Now the Docker file actually, credit where credit's due. So I actually first came across Yocto when I was working at National Instruments, and one of my customers was using their product line of Etis, which is one of the kind of sub companies of NI, but now is also a sub company of Emerson or Emerson. I'm not sure how to say it, but yeah, it's where I first came across it. And then there's this nice Docker file they have. Now I've had to modify it a little bit to update with the newer version because I'm using Scarf Gap. I think their latest builds with what would it be last time I saw? Hollister, something. Quite old basically. Well, old in the Yocto kind of terms of things. Yocto seems to progress quite quickly, really, and from my perspective anyway, in terms of versioning and changes. So it's very active, really, in the embedded world, from what I can tell anyway. So there's this nice build system, Docker file build system that it provides for us. I've sort of updated it from their version, so I'm using Ubuntu 22. because we're building with a much more modern version of Yocto. I've added in these 3 packages that were necessary. I've removed the Python 2 packages as well, which just don't really conform with anything anymore. I did try and change the locale to be GB because I'm British and using a UK keyboard, but it turns out actually it's not here because of my end device and what that'll end up being, but it's here for BitBake. BitBake seems to require it. So yeah, hence this commenting here as well. It also creates a user for the build, and I've configured it to for Git to use my email, but you might want to change that as well to your own. And yeah, you need to be a non-root user when building Yocto images. So Docker's defaulting to putting you in as root or UID 0 anyway wouldn't work, and it would just flag up some errors there. So that's our Docker file, and it's available at my container registry. So I've got it built. Here is latest on here. You can obviously pull it if you like. And then I've also created a GitLab CI YAML already. My first stage is that if my pipeline gets run with a Docker build variable, which I'll show in a sec how you can run that, but it will actually build Yocto latest and that image. And then it will use that image in the build step, and it will export what machine it actually needs, although from our local.conf. So if we have a look at nano build local, I think it's actually conf local.conf. If we have a look here, what was I actually looking up? I've forgotten. Machine, right? So our machine defaults to the RT Intel Core i7 if it's not set at all. It will so the difference between these two, of question marks, is the level of defaulting that it has. So if it's been set, if it hasn't been set, if it's set but empty, so forth. And also that implies on how much it will conflict when it's set in other things. So, for instance, Linux Intel RT here, if you were to build core image RT and you didn't have the kernel set to RT, so if it was just that, and you built core image RT, it might pull up an error that preferred provider has been overridden in the image recipe. So you want to keep those consistent as well. One thing I would to note is that we've got Mate2 directory here and Mate2 components directory, both set, and the SDN directory. So this tells those recipes where to install, but it also tells dependent recipes of these variables where those packages are in the sysroot. So if you're a Yocto user, you might understand what most of that means, hopefully. Yeah, so the other thing to mention is that, of course, I have this additional package, which is my package that I'm building, and I need to add that into my build system. So what I've done is I've gone to my meta Mate layer that I've been creating, and I've created this extra components folder, and then I've created my BB as well. So we'll have a look at that. So we've got well, actually, let's have a look at it through the GitHub, because then you can follow along, GitLab, sorry, and you can follow along as well. So in my meta Mate, I haven't uploaded it yet, so let's go ahead and do that. So if I go back and I go meta Mate, git status on this one, git add. I also made some modifications here to some things I noticed, but yeah, that's fine. Just some small minor errors really, but adding my okay, cool. And then want to make sure our submodules are up to date as well. Okay, brilliant. So let's have a look now. I will refresh. I've got meta to extra. Now I do a few tricks here. So the first trick I've got is this auto rev. So this means that it will just pull the latest version. So Yocto typically requires that you have a specific SHA code. But in this case, actually what I want to do is that every time my developers update on their package, I want that to trigger a new Yocto image rebuild and redeployment of the image with that new code. Now, of course, in reality, you would have in this image repository some level of testing as well, and some level of testing here, and we'll get onto some of that later on as well, actually. But in this case, we're just saying, hey, we'll just trust everything, redeploy the image. I've got my extra OE make settings, which is really kind of specific to Mate 2, but I give it those dependencies that I've just shown in local.conf, so it does rely on those variables for its build process. I also then have a manual install method. There is actually in this repository a make install method that I have, but I want to override that in this case. It's up to you. You know, I have expectation that you understand C++ or Yocto to do either one or Python. I then establish what files, and one of the tricks I've got here actually in my do install, you might want to have this as a do install append, is that because my source revision is going to change each time, I want to keep track of in my image of what is that source revision version I'm using. So I actually put that into a versions file and push that over to the image later on. But yeah, other than that, everything's pretty standard here. So that's okay. The only other thing is that in my images, and this is where you saw those two changes. So the first one was I noticed I hadn't actually included the require of core image minimal RT. So that was what that update was. And then in my RT, I've added in Mate 2 extra components, and that's what that is as well. Cool. So the next step now is I've got that Docker image that I built before, right? So let's have a look at how I was using it before. So if I go to here, so I built the image and it's all ready. It's got the tag for my registry, obviously. And one thing I'm doing is I'm sharing the volume of Yocto to Yocto because in my local.conf it says, hey, your shared directory of downloads, of shared state, of temporary files is all in Yocto, /Yocto, and then subsequent naming for that. That should kind of make things happen a lot faster. And we're going to work in this current directory with Mate 2. So this is with Mate Yocto as our root in the Docker image. So this is just to get us started. And, you know, before you do things in a GitLab YAML kind of set up in a pipeline, you want to try them out locally first. So that's what we're doing here. The other thing to note is that with the build directory from my previous build in video 2, I had to delete it and then restart. It didn't actually take too long because it had most of the state stuff already done and preserved in the root Yocto folder. But yeah, because of big sanity checks, you have to rebuild it because it notices that, hey, I've actually changed my location somehow from on a folder level and directory level, so it gets a bit confused, and that's just a sanity check. So it's easiest just to delete the build folder, start over. So let's do that. So let's go into our Docker image. We're now in OE Builder. We'll cd to Mate Yocto. We don't need to export that machine name. We can just source our open embedded file, OE, and then we can just say build our image. Now this should say pretty much already built, no tasks to do because we've done this before. So initializing tasks, it might redo the actual packaging because it likes to do that. Doesn't really have a way of like checking whether that needs changing at all. But hopefully, yeah, all succeeded. It knows it's run it before. So yeah, the image worked fine and so forth. So let's go back to Mate Yocto and just go back to our GitLab. Okay, so we know that these steps will work. You'll notice I've also got clean all. So clean all means to like clean its S state cache, to clean the download folder, as well as the actual temporary folder we use for building this package. and C means to do a certain task of a package up to a state. So this is the state we want to execute. This is the package. And then we rebuild our image. We do package index as well. And in paths, we save a few important things. So never mind catching, key catch, that's just to minimize our workload. We have a time out for 5 hours and 30 minutes. Just checking on time here for 14 minutes. Okay. And then we save our kernel image and our init ramfs and our rootfs and the packages that we create from the bitbake package index. So bitbake package index, I'm just showing that in case you're one of those Yocto users who likes to use a package management system. I think it's really, really great, but I've not really come across good opportunities to actually use it because of firewall network systems that happen at my work. But if you do use it, yeah, it's brilliant stuff. So I really just want to save these in artifacts so I can continue them on to the next stage. And the reason for that is we're going to build our Yocto image in a Docker, but we're going to actually deploy it through Shell because we need access to just a lot more of our capability, like the mounted files in NFS. We could probably do that in Docker, actually. We could probably do all of this in Docker, but with specific volume shared setups. So that's another option you'll have available if you want to kind of be cybersecurity thinking about this as well on kind of that level. So what the deploy section does is it simply copies that over to an NFS share where we've got the Raspberry Pi, all those files with the expected file names that we have. For the rootfs tar, it will obviously need to go to that folder and then extract it in the way we did before in video 2. So we're copying a lot of video 2 in terms of command structure, but we're just doing it in a pipeline. So the next stage with this then is to just show that, okay, so with my Raspberry Pi, one of the things I had to modify was actually to, this is Raspberry Pi, yep, so I just want to show that, get out the Yocto image and show that on the exports, I've added my 0.192.168 network. This is so that my Yocto build server can actually then mount the NFS directory on my Raspberry Pi, which I mount using, there's a lot of mount commands here, so don't get too confused, but I might be using something very similar to this, which tutorial, this tutorial. Yeah, just simple, really, mounting it like that. One thing to note is that, yeah, for a more permanent setup, I probably want to actually update my fstab file, but because my Raspberry Pi is only on when I'm doing these videos, that'll make it kind of corrupt when it tries to start up or throw errors, so I'm not doing that. I'm just having it temporarily exist, and you can see that it does exist where I expect it to. Oh, it isn't actually mounted. Yeah, I am on this. Okay, so let's show, I must have unmounted it. So let's show that. So I'm going to mount. Okay. Okay, now let's ls that file structure. And yeah, we've got our Yocto there. We've got Yocto here, and we can see that rootfs has actually been maintained here. Okay, so that should all work, except that we haven't actually got any runners as per our tags. So these tags specify what runner we want to use. And we want to use a Yocto Docker, we want to use a Yocto shell. So we don't actually have anything set up for that. So let's go to CI/CD. Let's go to runners, and let's build them. I want to remove this runner though. That's why I couldn't delete it before. Cool. So I'm just going to, it was something like Gitlab runner. There it is. Updated. Okay, so depending on whether you use sudo, if you use sudo, this will exist in the etc. I think it's .gitlab. Is it GitLab? Okay, config.toml, and then sudo that. Oh, yeah, and there's one I've created previously, but we're not going to do that one. So if you want to, you can create this on the sudo level if you use sudo for your command writing, but you might want to just use this on the user level. And so yeah, so I'm going to create Yocto Docker, the Docker runner for building Yocto images, max timeout. Well, I'll just go ahead and create this. So all this does is actually create the command for creating that, and so register. Don't need to change for you. Enter a name, Yocto Docker runner, and then set Docker as our executor. The default image, well, by default, I'll probably want it to just run something that I should think is always available. So now I've got home ed.gitlab, config.toml. So now I've got this definition here. And one thing I actually want to do is I want to change this a little bit. So one thing I want to note is that you could do sharing your .ssh folder. Now this can be useful if you have like SSH keys set up to maybe access the remote computer or some set of remote computers. So you might want to have in your GitLab YAML rebooting the deployed machine, because you will need to reboot it to get that NFS deployment to actually happen. So you can manually reboot it, or you could do it automatically. And one of the ways you could do that is securely, without putting into a file your passwords, is by having your SSH keys set up. And when you do SSH, it just uses that. There's other reasons you might want to have this, but that's just one note you could have here. So what we're doing is we're doing something very extremely similar to our Yocto, to our Docker run command that we had. So if I exit this and then we click up, you can see I've got volume. So that's what we're just specifying here. We're saying volume. So we're going to do volume again, and we're going to do read write, and that's all good. And so now I've set up, so I've got the exact same as here, and I've also given it the read write permissions as well. So one of the other files we looked at before was the etc., and I had something very similar to that. Yep, read write is the same. Okay. So that is now set up, that runner. We might want to select it to run. So let's go ahead and do that. Oh, I might want us to run as a daemon. I forget the command for that. Stack Overflow usually leads to the answer much quicker. Okay, cool. Okay, all happy there. So now we need to create our second runner though. We want to have, let's go back to CI/CD. We'll see that we have our Docker runner running. We want now our Yocto shell runner. Shell runner for executing shell commands on our Yocto repo. We'll create the runner. Do the same again. We'll copy that. We'll go URL's the same. Yocto shell runner shell. Right, and that's the important part to note. That it's a shell executor in this case. They don't have to be just Docker executors. did have a timeout variable, session timeout. So I've got 3 hours for a session. So I'm sort of okay with that actually. Yeah, 600 minutes. Is that really what? It's fine. Okay. So now I have all of that. I'm going to restart again. Check the status. Both of those now operating. If we go back to CI/CD settings, yeah. Expand runners. I've got both those runners. Well, this one runner has never contacted this instance, so it should in a minute though. My computer can be quite slow. Okay, and yeah, I just updated my GitLab YAML as well. So now it's going to be pending for a build. And actually this will be pending, so I need to cancel all of this actually, because I need to first actually build that build image. So I'm going to run my pipeline with a variable docker build. And I'm just going to put yes. It could be anything. It literally just checks whether the docker build actually exists. So now, yeah, we can see that doc is going to be happening next. Sorry about that. One of the things I did notice actually is that in order to get this to all work, actually it was more stable to use sudo in front of my commands. So ignore what I said before about using your own user. Suggestion is use sudo, and then they end up in the etc. Another thing to note is I actually had to put privileged equals true, so that the Docker build, so it can actually build Docker images. And just trying that out now, and I'll be tweaking it as I go and updating you on what tweaks I make. Okay, I had a little trouble with HTTPSing as well with my Docker image. So I don't have that certificate. Organizations obviously should invest in that. I'm not an organization, I'm a person, and I'm not going to pay for that kind of stuff. So that kind of caused me some problems with my Docker build. So now it's going to build my Docker image, clean all and so forth. So we'll just wait for that to complete. Cool. Okay, so after a bit of trouble, basically my server ran out of disk space, so I had to move my temporary TMP folder over to an external hard drive I had mounted, which is actually where the Yocto folder is, and then rebuild everything. But it shouldn't run into issues again because the external hard drive is more than enough space. But as we can see outside, that's what's happening in the external environment, so that's nothing to do with anything I've walked through. But it worked fine. It built my image and then deployed my image to the NFS share and extracted it. And then I've actually gone and I've SSH'd into my PC, and I can see that my new package is present on the machine now. So that's all worked fine. Deployments worked and everything. If I wanted to extend this, like if I had a fleet of devices that were using the NFS boot, then I might use Salt to actually cause that reboot that happened. Or I might use SSH if it's just one singular device, as I've said before. You could automate that in the pipeline as well, using SSH keys to make sure you don't need to put your passwords into your YAML files. But in this case, this is just an example and it works fine. Cool. So in the next one, the next session, what I'll do is I'll show how to create a Docker image from the Yocto image, and that way you can start using it in tests, and we'll start building some tests around the package itself for continuous integration. So this has been sort of a continuous deployment, and we'll move into continuous integration next.